I would like to introduce Daniel Glaser, Dr. Daniel Glaser, who is a neuroscientist involved in brain imaging of the visual system. He's worked for many years promoting public engagement with science. He's Director of Science Gallery London, King's College, and was previously Head of Engaging Science at the Wellcome Trust. In 2002, he was appointed Scientist in Residence at London's Institute of Contemporary Arts, and in 2005 received a Cultural Leadership Award from the National Endowment of Science, Technology and the Arts. And tonight Daniel will be talking about the joys of building a new venue where art and science collide, and how that functions at the interface between the university and the city. So I'd like to pass over to Daniel.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Right, so yeah, I love the lo-fi, Wi-Fi thing of having strips of paper cut up by scissors in order to allow one to connect to the internet. I think that's rather so, we are existing at the intersection between ancient and modern technology. So yeah, I've got half an hour, and I think there's a clue in the fact that you're all sat around tables, so I'm going to get some work out of you lot as well as telling you what I'm up to in terms of science gallery. I was kind of musing a little bit. I think the question I want you to help me with is about Leonardo, because as my pronunciation probably indicates, I've always been a bit sceptical about the value of Leonardo to our contemporary existence. And so what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about the model for science gallery, which is the kind of curatorial model. And it turns out that we've got this thing called a Leonardo group that's part of the science gallery model. And so the question I'm going to bang out to your tables in about 10 minutes' time is whether that's a good name for what we plan to do with this group, and if not, why not? And the other thing I thought I'd just kind of muse on, the reason I'm holding my iPhone is not because I'm expecting an important tweet, but because I was just looking up what a laser is, just because I thought, I knew it would be kind of relevant. And I mean, does anyone know off-pat, because I didn't, what the acronym stands for? Did anyone not know it was an acronym? Yeah, what's the acronym stand for, sir?
Light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation.
Yeah, that's right, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Although somebody pointed out on Wikipedia that it's not really amplification so much as oscillation. And so what it should really be is light oscillation, it's therefore loser rather than laser. But I think we're all quite glad that they pumped the laser rather than loser. And I think the point about a laser, if you read forward in the Wikipedia entry, is that by getting all of the, well, I don't know what you say, certain molecules or something in the medium to oscillate in a synchronized way, you generate a very coherent beam of radiation out of it. And it's the coherence of a laser, its oscillation in synchrony, that gives it its power. And it gives it two kinds of power, as you'd expect for a light or electromagnetic-like bit of radiation. It gives it power in time, and it gives it power in space. In particular, because it's collimated, which means that all of its rays are parallel, you can do lots of nice optics with it without it sort of fuzzing around the place. So in particular, it's good for pointers, like laser pointers. It retains its coherence over long distances when it's pointed at things. And its temporal coherence means that you can separate out different frequencies really well, and it's very good for the transmission of information. And I guess the question we might ask ourselves in the inaugural London meeting of this laser phenomenon is whether either of those things, synchronization in space or time, applies to the group, to the people in this room. In other words, I guess the question that we should be asking ourselves by the end of this evening is, have we oscillated in synchrony in such a way as to generate a coherent beam which we can focus through perhaps a lens onto targets of common interest? Or are we rather more humanly struggling to find coherence in such a way that any insights that we gain within the bounds of this room will rapidly dissipate as we spill out into the night, right? And I think the question, to me, the answer is likely to be the second, but I doubt we will obtain massive coherence in the room. And so I'm therefore a little troubled, but in a positive way, about whether laser is the right metaphor for what we're attempting to do. So let's see how that plays out as we go along. As Heather kindly mentioned, I was at the ICA in 2002 in one of those kind of funny world first things of the scientists in residence of the ICA. And if we think about London, which I think is probably quite a good place to think about the conjunction between science and art, it's clear that London and the ICA, in fact, have played quite an important role historically in this conjunction. And I don't know what your impression is, people, but my sense is that this is slightly passing, but until very recently, any time you tried to get a story in the newspaper or on the radio or on the telly about an artist working with a scientist, the only real dynamic to the story was, you know, scientists and artists collaborate, you know, and there was always something odd about it, you know, on the kind of man bites dog sense, which is rather silly, it seems to me, because Robert, since what, 1968 at the ICA with cybernetic serendipity, the ICA and other places have been at the centre of this kind of productive collaboration. And in fact, the origins of cybernetic serendipity go back into the 50s, as you would expect for cybernetics. And so I think, you know, through Sci-Arts, which some of you will know about, and been funded by, which was a coalition of funders then through Wellcome Trust, and now leading into Science Gallery, it's been clear that bringing people together from different places, putting them in a space where they can work together, and then having them go off again has been a productive thing for art. I met a guy from the Arts Council last week, and he was a bit worried as an arts funder, and relatively new in the game he was, about how to fund art and science projects, and whether he needed to have, as it were, a scientist in the Arts Council to help him think through them. And it feels to me, and I imagine, I mean, if one were to say, people's backgrounds here, if you're predominantly from an arts background, put your hand up now, predominantly from a science background, put your hand up. No, yeah, it's a little outnumbered. If you didn't put your hand up on either of those, put your hand up now. Okay. So, yeah, so from the arts perspective, if you regard the funding of art and high quality art as being important, I say that because Sci-Art historically was sort of associated often with second-rate art, but I think that's another thing which we're kind of getting beyond now. So if you want high-quality artistic outputs connected to science, you probably do need to have a bit of science knowledge or access to it. But I was saying to the chap, rather in the way that if somebody came to you at the Arts Council with a project around the Arab Spring, right, you'd probably want to talk to somebody who knew a bit about politics or the Middle East or something. Because otherwise they could just be selling you a story. They could have got all of their Arabic characters wrong, like Locock hilariously did, or was it London Transport in the run-up to the Olympics, where all of the Arabic characters were printed backwards on the programme. Welcome to the London Olympics. And so you kind of want somebody who can read Arabic to check over what you do. If you're going to be working in an artistic domain that collaborates with another, you probably need somebody from the second domain to at least check what you're doing. Right? So those of you who have heard me speak about this before will know that I have this thing called the convergent-divergent model, which is to say that it's good to get people from different places, start off differently, into a space of collaboration, right? A space where all kinds of conversation are allowed, like this evening. Right? Within this room it's okay for anybody to say anything. I didn't see so whether you held up your hand predominantly from science or predominantly from art. Yeah. Yeah, so it's okay for the scientist to offer the definition of laser, but actually in this space it would have been okay for anyone to come up with a definition. But then as we go back out into the world, it might be useful for those of us who are gallery owners to take care of kind of curating the commercial art shows, for those of us that are producing peer-reviewed scientific outputs to do that, because that's what they do, right? So we go back to our home disciplines for outputs and then perhaps reconverge. I suppose that's already, for me, the first sense in which laser is not the right metaphor. I think we only have temporary coherence, right? Remember, the thing about the laser is because the particles that generate the light beams are oscillating in perfect, as it were, synchrony, the synchronization and collimation travels over great distances. I don't think that's what happens when science and art come together. I think you generate temporary coherence and resonance, but almost as soon as the lid is taken off, as soon as we leave the room, that coherence disappears, and it's fine. People start to resynchronize with their home disciplines and produce their peer-reviewed outputs and their gallery shows and so on back home, and I think that's all right. So my first point is I'm kind of against hybrid outcomes, things that purport to do both, in principle. And now let me tell you about London's most exciting space where art and science collide, which exists at the intersection between the two. Right? So there's a deep hypocrisy in my comment here, but I think it's important, by default at least, to go back to where we came from, to produce outputs, and then to find new spaces again to collaborate. But that's not what I'm doing at the moment, so let me tell you how I'm doing it. been to Science Gallery Dublin, just in case, yes, who's not been to Science Gallery Dublin? Okay, so there is Science Gallery Dublin. Science Gallery is a space where art and science collide. The London one is being built opposite the Shard, which is a very tall building in London Bridge. Hilariously, somebody told me this and I didn't believe them. Did you know that the Eiffel Tower is in fact much taller than the Shard? I didn't know that, I was very disappointed. So it's the tallest building in Western Europe, but actually the Eiffel Tower, which is not a building, but the tower is much taller anyway. It's the tallest building in Western Europe. And there's some extraordinary things going on in London Bridge, among them Borough Market clearly, but then also Bermondsey Street and White Q, which is another gallery that exists down there, and the Shard itself with its conversions taking place. It's at an extraordinary site, and this will become important in 2015 for us. It's on the site of Europe's first McDonald's on a healthcare campus, which opened in 1992. When it opened in 1992, it was announced by the director of the Guys and Thomas's Trust, the Hospital Trust, as part of their contribution, commitment to staff welfare, and having a McDonald's within the hospital was a flagship part of that programme, which changed slightly since then. And when that McDonald's closes, because the lease is up, we're going to have a season about food and science and shopping and health, which we will invite you all to join in with. So it's a space. We're going to have 2 floors of galleries, a cafe, a shop, and a theatre, which is a kind of black box theatre, and also a courtyard. So we've got a Georgian square opposite the Shard, unreconstructed, which will be turning into a new public space. The curatorial model is interesting, and here comes the Leonardo bit, and I'll ask you for some thoughts on this in just a second. The curatorial model is that we have a Leonardo group, so-called, which comes up with themes. It's very likely that our first theme when the building opens in 2016 will be addictive. And around addictive, we will have an open call. I should say that when I say open call, I don't mean this in a passive sense. It's not just going to be a URL, which you could click on and submit. It'll be a curated open call in the sense that we're going to go out to the communities of Southwark and Lambeth, into the hospital, into the university, out amongst the commuters of London Bridge and the arts communities of Bermondsey Street, and your good selves, and solicit inputs and ideas for this season on called Addictive. And from that we will curate 3 or 4 months of programming that will include visual arts, sculpture, theatre, music, street fairs, scientific experiments, scientific demonstrations and visualizations, scientific artifacts, public experiments, debates, talks and so on. So there's no permanent collection in Science Gallery. It's simply a space where science and art collide around a particular theme. And when that 3-month theme is done, we strike, chuck it all out, and we go again. So it's quite a lot more like a performing arts space than it is like a museum. The intended audience is 15 to 25-year-olds. And the reason for that is principally because if you don't start there, you'll never get there. If you've built a place that's for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, the 15 to 25-year-olds find that a real turn-off. And similarly, if you go for the Radio 4 audience, BBC 2 audience, it's not clear that 15 to 25-year-olds can see themselves there. And in fact, although they do visit other attractions, they are underserved, our research has shown, in terms of places to experience both cutting-edge art and cutting-edge science in their own terms. And so the values of Science Gallery are connect, participate, surprise, connect in the sense that we want to connect with young people in their own terms and offer them opportunities to connect with each other. Participate because everybody who's part of it is building it. So through the open call, the audience are generating the content. Through the student mediators who are paid to be there all the time, anyone who comes into the space forms a part of the space and of the ideas within it. And surprise just in the obvious sense. It's not going to look like the Science Museum or a straight down the line presentation. It will be edgier and a bit more provocative, we hope. So that's the idea. And in 2014, we're going to be doing a season called Life Cycles. And Life Cycles is all about periodic biological behaviour of all kinds, from cells to cities. So that could be heartbeats or respiration, it could be sleep-wake cycles, it could be weekly cycles of commuting and pollution, it could be monthly hormonal cycles, it could be cycles of gestation and fertility, or annual cycles of mood and migration. And we're going to be exploring them through the medium of sound. And for that purpose, I've kind of come up with a thought called iterative curation. So the idea here is that you generate a small thing, and you use that to inspire the generation of some slightly bigger things, and from those you generate some even bigger things. And so I'm going to play you some sounds now, which I commissioned as part of this life cycle season. And I've been playing these to people around the shop, and we're going to be doing a few small, well, probably micro commissions off the back of this shortly. So the sound I'm going to play, I could do either the births or deaths. I think I'll do births. So I went to the head of informatics at Guy's Hospital, and I got all of the births and all of the deaths in the hospital for the last 10 years. And then I worked with a sound artist called Dan Jones from Goldsmiths, and he's turned them into sound for me. So I'm going to play you all the births, I think, rather than the deaths. Deaths are a bit depressing. Well, actually, there are fewer and fewer deaths as time passes over the 10 years, so that's probably a good thing. So what you're going to hear is all of the births that have been in the hospital for the last 10 years. And high tones are more births per hour over the weekly cycle, and low tones are fewer births. The ticks are hours, these are days. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And you can hear, in fact, that there are more births on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays than there are on Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays and Mondays. Anyone want to suggest why that might be? So it's elective cesareans and it's inductions. You know, to induce labour on Friday in the NHS would be a really stupid idea. Yeah. So it is man-made, as it were, probably man, but it's a person-made human influence on birth that gives rise to that periodicity. And the interesting thing about sonification, and I speak here as somebody who studied, who did active neuroscience for 15 years, when you want to find patterns in time, you're much better off using your ears than you are using your eyes. And patterns in space, your eyes are pretty good at. The patterns in time, your ears are best. And you know that if you're a neuroscientist, because doing electrophysiology, when you're trying to record the firing patterns of nerve cells, you use a loudspeaker much more often than you use an oscilloscope. Right? So and I mean, this is kind of motor learning. You've got this anaesthetised cat in the lab. In your right hand, you've got a micro manipulator. So every time you turn this little handle, the electrode moves forwards or backwards into the brain of the animal by a thousandth of a millimetre. And what you're doing, the reason I got my eyes closed when I showed the story is because what you're doing is you're listening. And what you're listening to is the sound, the amplified sound of the nerve cells, the neurons in the vicinity of the tip of the electrode deep in the brain of the animal, you can do it with humans as well. And you're closing your eyes because it is your ear that is best placed to detect these patterns in time. So life cycles is all about finding these patterns and using your ear to explore them. Now, how are we going to proceed? We're probably going to do 8 micro commissions, and the way we're going to do them, I will get to Leonardo in a moment, is as a form of both public engagement and of, looking for planning permission, trying to raise money, all the things that we need to do, community engagement to build a gallery, are being delivered through this season. How's that? Well, the 8 or so people that we're going to engage with on this are people like the following. The head of the cancer centre that's being built at Guy's Hospital, a fertility doctor, someone from the Nuffield Sleep Centre, who studies disruptions of sleep rhythms, a student nurse, a hospital porter, a counter server at McDonald's, a gate line inspector from London Bridge Station, a school child from the vicinity, and a medical student from college. And each of those will be paired up with a sound artist or composer. I haven't quite worked out how yet, but probably we might do what's like a hack day where we just kind of lock them in a space for 24 or 48 hours and don't come out until they've come up with a sound. It might be some other thing, but here the rapidity with which the artist or composer can produce sound is going to be an important element of the commission. And from that second iteration after this one of the technique, we'll develop some sound and we'll play those sounds back to the communities, to the peer groups of the 8 people I mentioned initially. So this won't generate a public exhibition, it'll generate a process of community engagement, probably be integrated in with a festival called Merge in Southwark. But the reason I'm telling you all this detail is to say that what we're trying to do is to generate a context in which people who would not normally own and control a conversation about biorhythms, about the rhythms of life, about the relationship between the ears and the eyes, between patterns of fertility or pollution, get a chance to generate a story. Right? And you will have probably experienced in listening to that weekly cycle of births within Guy's Hospital over the last 10 years, that your curiosity was piqued. You probably, in fact, whether you knew it or not, developed some hypotheses about that sound when I asked you why there was that pattern of rhythmicity. And by doing this kind of artistic engagement with a scientific phenomenon, we hope to allow the peers of the people generating these sounds to control a conversation about the rhythms of life in the London Bridge area. Okay, so now Leonardo quickly, folks. I started saying it normally, but I normally say Leonardo. So, Leonardo, right, and many of you know much more about him than I do, it seems to me did have a laser-like focus on whatever it was he was studying. And he really did examine them. And did anyone see the exhibition of his drawings at Buckingham Palace that was up a few years ago? Quite extraordinary. And in fact, the exhibition was brought to life for me by a Wellcome Trust funded project involving Clod Ensemble, where they brought together some surgeons and some artists together to walk around that space and look at the pictures. And for the surgeons, the shock of recognition when they saw this particular drawing, the articulation of the elbow, was palpable. It was extraordinary to see those drawings through their eyes. Okay, so now, the question I want you to ask on your tables for like 2 minutes, and this is a technique, a facilitatory technique, which asks you to start discussing a question but not finish, so we're going to stop before you reach the end of it. Did Leonardo, as he did, really work at the intersection between art and science? I mean, would he have recognised this kind of gathering, trying to bring together the two communities, as part of what he was doing? And the corollary, a follow-up question is, should we be aiming for, should we be trying to generate, if we're interested in education and learning, people more like Leonardo? Is that what this process is about? Is Leonardo a sort of role model for the kinds of education young people or engagement processes that we're trying to develop in our work? Those of us chosen to be in this room today in interest. Is Leonardo a good role model for what we're trying to do here? So ask your neighbour on your table that question. We'll start the conversation, we'll come back and then we'll stop. So just let me, to twitch the curtain slightly from how, this is a technique you can use, folks, if you're ever giving lectures. You can do this with a hall of 1,000 people or 5,000 people. It works very well. You get them to ask the question to each other, the person next to them that you're about to engage with. And we're going to ask you in a minute what you'll think, but the trick you have to remember is to start people thinking, not stop people thinking. So the only price you pay is you have to interrupt people in the middle of their conversation. So that's just what's happening, that's why you haven't got anywhere yet. Marina, anyone? The easy one first was Leonardo working at the intersection between art and science as we are?
Yes.
Yes? Really? Go on, how? How's that true?
Well, they really wanted a subject called fun.
Right, correct.
There was a very clear subject called art.
Yeah.
Doing it about in a very scientific way.
I have no doubt whatsoever he was a prototype of the art science.
Right, so he was, in that sense, he was still working at the intersection. Anyone want to agree or disagree with that briefly? Was he working at the intersection? Yeah.
We kind of disagree because we think the times were very different then and we didn't have the vertical structures that we have in institutions now. So it was much easier to work in a fluid kind of way.
Yeah. Very good. Would he in any way have seen himself as an interdisciplinary? Was he crossing disciplinary boundaries?
Everyone could be in those days.
Anyone would be.
Kind of ideal specializations.
Okay, so do we need more people like that? I mean, there is an educational intent, I think, for quite a lot of the convening of this group, unless I'm wrong. Many of us are in universities, which at least in part do teaching. And so is Leonardo a role model for what we should be encouraging young people to do with the problems that face them today? Did anyone give a sense of that? Yeah.
Well, the thing that strikes me about him is that he wasn't afraid of writing.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, in a sense, there seems to me to be a correlation between his practice and in a sense what we understand as practice-led research and the comfortableness of artists who write.
Mm-hmm. Even if he did it backwards.
Given that he did it backwards, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyone else? Is he a good role model for the people that we're trying to inspire and engage with?
Yeah, he was curious.
He was curious. Yeah. Curiosity. Anyone else see him as a role model?
Well, basically, it's within himself as well as applied to two disciplines come together, which we all had, was within the same person, having to use the biblical vision.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's healthy.
was still in the time, wasn't it? What was the day, the last day in history where there was one person on the planet who knew everything? It was that was sometime in the 18th century, wasn't it?
The Renaissance man.
Yeah, and he was still in the age where it was possible for one person to know everything. This kind of thought, as we haven't come across it, things became specialised sometime in the late 18th century, and then beyond that point, it was impossible to know everything. Up until that point, you could kind of reasonably aspire to know basically everything there was to know. Anyone else find them inspiring or not inspiring? Myself, I don't find them inspiring, but I'll tell you why in a second.
Also innovative.
Innovative, yeah.
Yes.
How so?
In terms of inventing things that were solutions to problems,
Yeah.
underwater sloops and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inventing things that were useful was part of the inspiration. Yeah.
I mean, I think that he sort of, I think the world could use a fair few more people like him, but the reality also is we rely on and we do need our specialization. So you need those people who can really act as bridges and conduits for transfer of ideas, but I wouldn't actually want something where everybody sort of would complete generalists.
We would not.
I would not.
Would not want something where everybody was a complete generalist. I would agree with you on that. Yes. Last thoughts? I'll give you my time to let them stop. Yes.
Well, this is not a one-size-fits-all, just to pick up on Johanna's point. But I think one thing we could take is a flexibility of thinking and a flexibility of appropriating methodologies and finding solutions to fit a particular type of problem.
Flexibility. Okay, so in my last 2 minutes, let me tell you what I think. So, speaker's privilege. I'm really against it. So, in the sense that I think the notion of having as an inspirational figure somebody who does both may not be what I would be after for the kinds of things I'm trying to do, and I'll tell you for why. The reason is because I'm actually interested fundamentally in social justice. Okay, that's why I do the things that I do. So I'm interested in the intersection between science and art, not because I'm looking for ever more esoteric combinations of expert learning, nor because I'm looking for individuals who understand everything, who can combine things in novel ways. What I'm interested in is the loosening effect which looking at something from more than one perspective gives. I'm actually interested in the opposite of the laser, right? I'm interested in decoherence. I'm interested in loosening power structures. And particularly it seems to me when it comes to science, although there are parallel problems with art, the interpretation, the explanation of these expert domains is a power-driven process. I mean, you don't have to be Foucault or even believe in Foucault to think that knowledge is power in this kind of situation. When it comes to scientific truths, there's something rather unusefully restrictive about the ways that they're bandied about in public discourse. The particular problem which scientists often have when they talk in public about their work, often when scientists are given the platform to speak on a particular subject, they feel the need to adopt this mantle of certainty. They tell you the truth about the particular domain that they're on to talk about. And when people question that truth in the public context, they get very upset, often. I speak from personal experience here, and as someone who was responsible for a lot of scientists doing this. And that's very unhelpful for a couple of reasons. One is because it's dishonest, because everybody knows that the process of science is actually about questioning stuff. Nobody got tenure by agreeing with the orthodoxy. To be a successful scientist, you've got to question and test everything. And again, you don't have to be Karl Popper to believe that the way to get ahead in science is to try and falsify hypotheses, not to try and prove them right. And the corollary of that, the second reason, is that this undermines public trust in science because the public aren't stupid. And they realise that as soon as the microphones are turned off, the scientist will go back to the lab and she'll start arguing with her peers on exactly the topics which she was trying to appear certain about on the telly. Okay? Now, the effect of interdisciplinarity is to loosen the strictures and the bounds of orthodox knowledge and to allow individuals to question stuff. And the things that they question, for me, could come from any single domain. So it would be as valuable to loosen the bounds of authority from a very powerful artist as it would to loosen the powers of authority of a very authoritative and prominent scientist. Through interdisciplinarity, we undermine an individual's claims to truth. And if you are interested in social justice as I am, then a space like Science Gallery is exciting because it allows the residents of Southwark and Lambeth, the commuters, the students, the doctors and nurses, the researchers, and hopefully the former patrons of the McDonald's to engage with science and art on their own terms. That's what I have for you. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk later, but thanks very much in the meantime for your attention.